these ETFs are coming in with more money than they've ever had for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin are already gone. The potential for a super cycle, the potential for $1 million Bitcoin by 2026, it's on the table.
The important thing is that we have Bitcoin and everybody can choose to just be on chain.
The amount of buying power that's coming in from the ETFs is insane. People are waking up to the fact that something is wrong.
Why is it Bitcoin only? Like, why do you think that we only have Bitcoin that has a really realistic chance that it will survive and be the base layer of everything? Why can it not be something else?
Like that. And I mean, basically when I got started in Bitcoin, it's like I got started in the shitcoins. Like the peak 2020 rally is kind of when I first got in, and I was investing into the shitcoins. And I didn't really know much about it at that point. But then as like getting into more about crypto and Bitcoin, it became pretty obvious that Bitcoin was different. I think it gets down to the trilemma. So the decentralization, security, and scalability. And Bitcoin was the only one that was able to achieve the full decentralization and full security. So from that perspective, it's because humans aren't able to control the network. They aren't able to, or basically any authority isn't able to control the network and then change the network and then potentially destroy the network. So it's the fact that we have the security that we know that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin and that no one else is going to be able to change the network. So like the integrity of the network, I would say, is the biggest deal and why it's Bitcoin and not crypto.
Yeah, it has to be decentralized. If it's like if you want a decentralized and state-resistant currency, it has to solve the first problem statement that it is decentralized, and all the altcoins fail at the first thing, like the first problem statement they even come up with being decentralized, they fail. So it does not matter that they have this and that's faster, more scalability, whatever they claim to have. It doesn't matter because the first problem statement with their being decentralized is not true. So it's, I think, really, really cool. And you also said you're coming lately more into Austrian economics, which is really, really cool. I'm, myself based in Austria. It was funny because when I got into Bitcoin, I was like, why are they all talking about Austrian economics? There's nothing special about the economics in Austria. It's like really shitty, actually. And then I discovered, it's not about the current Austrian economics. It's about the Austrian economics philosophy. Why are you now lately getting into this? Like, why are you motivated about Austrian economics?
Yeah, I think putting Austrian economics together with Bitcoin, it kind of like paints this picture of like truth. I think Bitcoin in general kind of is like a lens of truth where it lets you see through like all of these lies that have been created about money and economics, that is, like, I like to say, in the matrix that was created because the authority that wanted control over money and then basically propagated the Keynesian economic theories. So like that's been circulating like within populations for generations, is this the Keynesian economic model. And I mean, it's all that they basically taught me in public school, and I go to Cal State East Bay now, and it's mostly like that's the economics that they teach, and they teach it almost as if it's fact. I mean, Bitcoin with the lens of truth, it allowed me to challenge those economic theories and then to also see that they're actually wrong. I'm just diving into Rothbard and Hayek and getting into some of their economic theories and their theories about money, and kind of how Hayek combated Keynesian economics, like in the early days of like central banking in America. And it's just so crazy to me how most of the Austrian economic theories were suppressed. and how most people really don't even know who Hayek and Rothbard and Mises, they don't really know who they are. Because I talk to my dad all the time about, I basically orange pilled him. But all of his economic theories and ideas about economics are Keynes, and he doesn't even know who the Austrian economics professors or economists, he doesn't really know who they are. So I guess, and I want to like look to the future on what the future of money actually looks like. And it's pretty clear that the fiat experiment and Keynesian economics that were used to justify the fiat experiment, it's pretty clear that that's not, it didn't work, and that we have to try something new, or go back to Hayek's thesis and then turn back to the Austrian economic model for the future of money.
For people that maybe are new now in the Bitcoin space, like I'm always aware that when there's a Bitcoin conversation, there's always like some new listeners in the conversation that are like just now coming into the rabbit hole and just now like, oh, what is this Austrian economics? What is this Bitcoin? And maybe they like just randomly click on a video. So for people that don't know or like earlier in the education phase, can you briefly explain like what is Keynesian economics, why is it wrong, and what's then the opposite with Austrian economics, and why is it suiting so good to Bitcoin? Can you briefly give us like an overview of that?
Yeah. So the Austrian economics is more of studying like human behavior and how the free market will operate based on the individual's incentive, like to seek their best interest, their best self-interest. And then Keynesian economics is more of justifying the centralized planning of money, and then being able to justify like, oh, when we need to print money, or when we need to contract the money supply, or all of these models and data points where they can say have cause and effect relationships with each other to justify more government interaction or more centralized planning to help or save the economy that wouldn't otherwise function without their manipulation in the market. Austrian economics applies to the Bitcoin model because there is no authority on Bitcoin. Basically, because it's the decentralized network and there is no authority that can control any aspect of the free market that's in Bitcoin, that it allows the Austrian economic theories to play out, because it's simply just a free market where everybody's incentivized to seek their best self-interest.
It's amazing for me also when I think about it, because like when you get Bitcoin, when you're in the state of getting Bitcoin, you're kind of getting relaxed about it. Like I was getting into Bitcoin first in 2020, so it's been now getting to 4 years of being in Bitcoin, and the first 1, 2, like even 2.5 years, I was really vocal about it. I was telling everybody at work, telling everybody in the family about Bitcoin. But the more and more I actually got Bitcoin, I got really relaxed and chilled about it. And I'm now having the podcast, I do my tweets, but outside of that, in my normal environment with family, I rarely bring up Bitcoin. I wait till someone else brings it up and then we can talk about it, because I know Bitcoin will just happen. Like if I scream about Bitcoin all day long, it will not make a difference. And if I don't say anything about Bitcoin, it will also not change anything. Bitcoin will just come. And there's like a professor in our university that I was, now I'm not there anymore. He's teaching about IT security. And he always starts with shitting on Bitcoin the first 10 minutes for some reason. And I had a conversation with him and I told him, you know that you are making advertisement for Bitcoin, right? That the act that you are actually talking about Bitcoin, where you should talk about IT security, is making all the students questions like, why is he talking about Bitcoin? And there were like people, there will be always like there like 500 people sitting there. At least 5 people are like, why is he now talking about Bitcoin? Let's Google Bitcoin. And then they are going to a podcast. They're like, oh shit, I'm now Bitcoin maxi 2 years later. so,
Mm-hmm.
so, so no matter what happens, and no matter what's happening, like people talk shit about Bitcoin, people talk good about Bitcoin, people don't talk about Bitcoin. It gets rarer and rarer that people don't have an opinion on Bitcoin. It will just happen with the natural state of the adoption of sound money. But it's always interesting for me how this can happen. And then I'm interested in your view, like, how do you think we will adopt Bitcoin in the like next 10, 20, 50 years? And what will be the hurdles, and what will be like the drivers of that Bitcoin adoption? I think number go up technology, like the price itself is a big driver, because I see it also like in the normal environment. All of a sudden, people are now talking about more and more about Bitcoin. It's still kind of weirdly calm for the high price we have now. I don't know if it does also your feeling.
Yeah, I mean, when the price goes up, it's like everybody that I talk to in my circle is like hitting me up, like, oh yeah, Bitcoin. Like, how do I get in on this? Because it's the price is running up and everybody's getting excited. So that's always fun because I could basically talk about Bitcoin forever. But how adoption happens, for one, I think it needs to happen because um like the corruption of money is just real. And we're seeing it in countries like Argentina, Lebanon, like Venezuela, where their fiat currencies have already hyperinflated, and then their people have to be desperate for an alternative for money. And I think the biggest hurdle is probably the educational hurdle, like for at least like the early adoption of Bitcoin. Because I mean, I'd imagine, I don't really know, but in Argentina, it's like, from my perspective, knowing about what Bitcoin is, like they have to have a significant demand for Bitcoin, because if their currency is running away, like prices are changing every day. That seems pretty logical. So just simply educating people about what Bitcoin is one step, but then also scaling the technology. Like I think payments there'll be a bunch of different ways that people will make payments on Bitcoin, like layer one, or Lightning, or like the Fediment and the Liquid protocols. People are building new things on top of Bitcoin that will probably all eat up some market share for transactions in Bitcoin. But like as it sits today, like I feel like we need the alternative now. And a lot of other countries outside the United States definitely need it now. But even in the United States, it's like we still have inflation. Like younger, like my generation, I'm 23. There's going to college, having a big debt to pay for your college education, and then going into the workforce and really barely even being able to support yourself on like getting a degree from a good school. People are waking up to the fact that something is wrong. So I think we need a new technology, and that's something that I'm working on right now, is um, something that can scale the transactions and allow people to transact completely in Bitcoin and exit the fiat monetary system. But like now, like it could be a choice, A, B, like fiat money or Bitcoin. And obviously at that point, if they can make that decision, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, you mentioned it also before the podcast that you're working on something that is like issued on top of Bitcoin. What exactly like is that, and how does it work?
Yeah, so this aligns with Hayek, and his thesis was that we need to take the money out of the hands of government in that sly roundabout way, because he feels like there's no way that government's going to relinquish the control that they already have. But he also argued that there should be a free market for currency, so that anybody can issue their own currency, and it is up to the market whether they choose to use that currency or not. And like that Austrian economics, like no authority kind of thought process would be, okay, you're just incentivizing people to use it, And if it provides them the service that they need, which is transacting in Bitcoin, then you can fulfill that demand. Yeah, Hayek would argue taking the money out of the hands of the government and then allowing a free market of private currency issuers to compete for market share for money. And I think that Bitcoin is that base layer, like gold was the base layer to the fiat that people or that nation states printed their fiat on top of, and then obviously hyperinflated and imposed their monopoly, which made them be able to move away from the gold standard and then basically propagate their Keynesian economic models and theories so that people can continue to use the fiat money. But I think that there's going to be a similar market to how fiat worked on top of gold, except for because there's no authority on Bitcoin and that it's free and transparent, that there's going to be a free market for private currency issuers on top of Bitcoin, where basically what I'm building, I call it the SAT blockchain, is a private currency that will be backed 100% by the Bitcoin. But the SAT blockchain is a centralized entity. So, and that's kind of like a stigma in the Bitcoin space where you say, not your keys, not your wallet, or not your coins, and they're really against the centralization of Bitcoin. But I feel like we need centralized service providers on top of Bitcoin to allow Bitcoin to reach the hands of more people. It's just like the ETFs. It's like, okay, we have almost 300,000 Bitcoin in ETFs. Those are centralized custodians. Or we have like mining pools where you'll subscribe to the mining pool, and that's a centralized custodian. Or an exchange, that's a centralized custodian. So I feel like it's not a problem to have a centralized custodian to be able to facilitate payments. And if there's a free market if there's a free market competition for those companies and those service providers on top of Bitcoin that are providing the service of payments on Bitcoin, then that free market can hold together the discipline and create efficiencies and innovation on top of Bitcoin and for payments, which I also believe that it needs to be a full reserve. Like, we can't have a fractional reserve. We can't create paper Bitcoin, but that's the discipline that I'm talking about a free market would enforce. Because if we have multiple currency issuers on top of Bitcoin, if one of them chose to devalue their currency, as in create more of their issued currency than they have in Bitcoin and reserves, then they would be devaluing their customers or devaluing their currency, which would be stealing from their customers. So that's how I think a free market would enforce that discipline of having that full reserve. And then if it's always auditable to where you can go back and verify that it is in fact fully reserved, then I think that's what the future of money is going to look like.
I'm super excited to announce that this podcast got the first ever sponsor. 21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. I mean, there are two really, really interesting parts we can more talk about deeply about. The first part is that Bitcoin is kind of like not replacing Visa or MasterCard. Bitcoin is replacing the central banks. In my opinion, it's like the foundation of everything, and then people can make stuff on top of it. And then we come to the second part where people build on top of Bitcoin. And the great part is that you can do whatever you want on Bitcoin, and people can freely decide if they like that solution, or if they like Fedimint, Lightning, or whatever they want. They can freely choose what payment service provider they have, because Lightning also is like, most of the people that use Lightning use Wallet of Satoshi, which is a centralized service, as I see it. And then there's Fedimint with the federals. So there's so many different solutions, and you can even make an argument that Bitcoin ETFs is a layer on top of Bitcoin. You can make an argument that that like PayPal and stuff like that, or the Cash App, that these are things on top of Bitcoin that are centralized services. So this will happening anyways. Like we will have layers on top of Bitcoin that are centralized, and that are like uh, expanding on the Bitcoin value in some sort of form. Like they are faster, they are more privacy related, whatever they claim to have, they can do. But the important thing is that we have Bitcoin, and everybody can choose to just be on chain and be on the main thing. And the second part is that it's audible, it's verifiable. You don't know how much gold the Federal Reserve really has or had, because now they not even like packed it, like they completely gave up on that in 1971. But even before, you could not audit it because nobody got the gold. With Bitcoin, it's way easier to audit. Right? You can just give address out. You can just provide how many users you have, and then everybody can match that, and it will be really obvious if there is something shitty going on. Maybe like if it's just like 1%. Or 2% of not reserved, it's maybe possible for a short amount of time to fool people, but not for long, and not a lot. So this will be really interesting to see how this all will evolve with Bitcoin, and it all will go on with Bitcoin. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think instead of Bitcoin replacing the central bank, I see it more as Bitcoin replacing what gold was to the central bank, right? So yeah.
Yeah, actually, this is more accurate, because, but it's kind of weird, because gold is just like the commodity, and it did not really had the network aspect, because Bitcoin is also like a payment network where you can transact with it, and gold also was this, because you can go around and put it. But the central bank in the beginning tried to do that with gold. Like they tried to like, I have gold, and then I can transact with the paper notes. But central banks are like, nah. You can make an argument the central banks are like the layer on top of gold, where you have more like a lightning provider. Like central banks are more like even the layer 2 of it. Yeah, you're right about that.
Actually, I do have one more thing to add. And it's the integrity of Bitcoin. So I feel like we have developers in the space that want to contribute to Bitcoin, or they want to make Bitcoin more scalable or make it better money, because that's what Satoshi put on his white paper, is peer-to-peer cash system. And I don't think that that's a good approach, because Bitcoin is like this miraculous conception that will probably never happen again. And I feel like developers that want to make more changes to Bitcoin so that they can make it better money are maybe missing some of the risk factors that would be involved with changing the protocol. Like the ecosystem that's built around Bitcoin that secures Bitcoin. If you change the protocol, I fear that maybe the second and third order effects of that change to the protocol, even if it is a soft fork, if it gets adopted by enough computers, I feel like they could create vulnerabilities that could be existential to Bitcoin, like further down the road. So from my perspective, I feel like we need to keep Bitcoin's integrity intact, and we need to refrain from changing it. Unless obviously if Bitcoin is truly like in danger of failing, then that would that would constitute a change. But even then, we should be really careful about how and when we change it and how it's implemented, because this is like the greatest liberating force that humanity's ever seen, and we need to be really careful with this technology.
Yeah, totally. And it's so fascinating for me to see the implications of that. I, I always come back to that one question that is not completely clear for me with Bitcoin and politics, because if you see Bitcoin as a fundamental layer to our lives because it's money, it will dramatically change how we transact with each other, that we have stuff with each other. What do you think will be like the implications for politics, the implications for the society in total for Bitcoin, and maybe in another way asked, what do you think is wrong now with politics, and how can Bitcoin fix that?
This gets like kind of into like the game theory a little bit. It's some interesting stuff. And right now I'm reading The Sovereign Individual, which is kind of changing my perspective a little bit. But like governments today that have control over their fiat and that get funded by their central bank, pretty much unlimited to the amount of control or the amount of funding that they can have to implement that control, or the amount of funding that they have to take action, I guess. But in a world where governments can no longer fund themselves with an unlimited money printer, I see a lot more accountability for nations, governments around the world, and governments won't necessarily be able to fund all of the things that they're funding today. So I think government evolves to become more of like a service being provided to customers. Bitcoin allows everybody to really vote with their feet, and whichever government is providing the superior service, just like the free market, will attract the most wealth and the most people that are willing to produce. And I feel like at that point, especially if we have a way where transactions can be private, like in one of those layers that's on top of Bitcoin, in terms of the amount of tax that governments can now collect is also in question, because if they don't know anything about any of your finances, then how can they impose any sort of rules that require you to pay a tax on the money that they don't know you have? So I think it will enforce some accountability with governments and the rules and regulations that they want to impose on their people, and whether they are extracting or attempting to extract wealth from their people. I think people will go to the nations that can provide the superior service, and then at that point, you're paying governments for protection. And if a government is providing protection, then you are incentivized to pay your taxes so that you can maintain being protected. I mean,
Yeah, I hear this all the time with Bitcoiners, and I'm totally agree with that. That governments are like a service provider for you. We kind of went off the track with the politics, because um, politics, I think, for me, is like an service to their citizens. And it seems like now it's the other way around, where the citizens are a service to the governments. They're like, we have to do what they were doing. There's full control. There's full monitoring going on. I mean, depends on where you live. It's better or worse, your situation. But it kind of is now the other way around, where I'm like, it actually should be, I'm paying the government, so they should be on my service. and they should have also things that they are competing with. And privatization is always something I'm voting for. It's like always like, let's keep it private, because then there is more efficiency, then there's a free market, and someone will compete for that dollar, for that Bitcoin, for that Satoshi. If there's no competition, no one has the incentive to do a good job. I see it all the time when I'm interacting with the government. It's inefficient. it's clunky. The software is not good. Even if they are digitalizing something, it's weirdly not doing good. And then we come to an interesting topic with CBDCs, because a great argument I heard against CBDCs from someone was like, they cannot implement that because they cannot implement any software. If they are too stupid to do that. I don't know if this is actually true. I think they can adopt something. I also got an interesting comment yesterday. They're like, "Oh, why are you for Bitcoin? Because is Bitcoin sitting in a room with the IMF, XRP is, and Ripple is?" And I'm like, this is a good thing for Bitcoin. I would not build on that. Ripple is sitting in the room with IMF. This is actually a bad thing for Ripple. It's kind of showing that it's not having its purpose. How do you see it? The whole thing with wait, that's an interesting thing. The Bitcoin ETFs are now coming, and they're bringing a lot of buying power in the system. And for me, it's the question, and we were before, like in the 2021 cycle, in 2020 and 2021 cycle, this was always a talk, could this be the super cycle? And now the talks are coming back up. Is that cycle now a super cycle, where this 4-year cycle maybe is be broken? Do you have any thoughts on that? Can be Bitcoin ETF and a trigger for a super cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for that to happen, for one. But the amount of buying power that's coming in from the ETFs is insane. Like, it's blowing my mind what's happening. Like, this past week, and probably this next week will be some pretty crazy moves. Like, I think we had the largest monthly candle in Bitcoin February. So that's directly tied to the ETFs. And I mean, well, scrolling through Twitter and what people are saying about the OTC desks, and then the miners that want to hold their bags too as they prepare for the run and they have their rigs ready. I just think if Bitcoin's gone and these ETFs are coming in with more money than they've ever had for Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin are already gone, and we've only had the ETFs for a month or two, yeah, the potential for a super cycle, the potential for $1 million Bitcoin by 2026, like it's on the table. So, I mean, yeah, and if that happens, and then the ETFs and the institutions are now like FOMOing in at $1 million Bitcoin, like I don't know when the 4-year cycle, the downturn would come, if there's still no Bitcoin left for sale, and there's institutions and potentially nation states all jumping in to try and get the Bitcoin that's already gone. So maybe.
Yeah, it will be an interesting experiment to see. So many more people want Bitcoin, and there's less and less available. New supply is halving in April, I guess. 20th or something like this would be a nice date for that. For coming closer to the end, I have some interesting questions for you that I'm thinking a lot about. What do you think Bitcoin will fix that probably nobody thinks about right now? Because I think we are really, really early in Bitcoin, and I always compare it a little bit also to the internet adoption, when we are like in the 1995, 1994, 1997, wherever we are right now with the Bitcoin adoption. And there is no iPhone now, there is no Facebook, there is no YouTube, there's the killer applications and the really big steps as just getting into Bitcoin in like 5 years, in 10 years. And there are so many innovation that needs to happen on top of Bitcoin, or that will happen on top of Bitcoin. And we have to be aware that we are really, really early. What do you think Bitcoin will fix that nobody is thinking about right now?
I would say connecting a global economy to where you can basically get the whole world interacting on a medium where we can all basically interact in a manner that we'd never been able to do before. And I think that could generate prosperity for humanity that humanity's never even thought to be achievable. So I think, just being able to connect adversaries, connect people around the globe, because being able to just click of a button, be able to send money across the globe instantly will be something that we've never had before. So, I would say the prosperity that it can create for everybody.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, this is, I think a lot about that. And I think it's very, very true what you're saying. For people that, are like when you meet someone that is completely new, what are your like go-to orange pilling packages, like your books, your podcasts, your articles? What do you usually recommend people getting into and reading? I saw, I think, on your podcast that there's like a Bitcoin standard on the shelf. So like, what are your like go-to articles, books, podcasts, whatever you recommend people getting into?
Definitely fiat or Bitcoin standard. I think that's just like the best way for a beginner to get in, because that's how like my first book into Bitcoin was probably the Bitcoin standard. Gradually, then suddenly, Parker Lewis. I think that's got a more comprehensive, like, this is fiat money and this is Bitcoin. This is why it's way better. Podcast, Robert Breedlove, What is Money show.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I've been binging that for years. Michael Seyr, anything that he says, pretty much.
Did you hear his speech on the Bitcoin Atlantis?
I don't think I got to listen to it yet.
Yeah, I also did not got to. I only saw snippets till now, but it was pretty amazing what I heard. But like always, yeah, cool. We're having an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest. And is bringing like in a question that is not suited for you. It's like something that he does not know you, and he just asks a question for the next guest without knowing you. And that's an interesting one. I never thought of questioning, asking that myself. What could be the strongest change you as Mateo bring into Bitcoin? What can you do to improve Bitcoin? I think we touched on that with the private issuing and what you're doing, but what do you think is that?
Yeah, I would say getting Bitcoin into as many hands as possible.
That's the most important thing that we have to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Educating people on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you on. It was a nice conversation, I think. And where can people get in touch with you the best? Where can people find something about you?
Yeah, Twitter, just my name, Mateo DiDomenico. And then I also have a podcast, Bitcoin Profits, and I'm going to start making more episodes. I've taken about a few months off since I've working on a project, but I'm looking to start making some more podcast episodes as the price runs up and everybody gets excited. And like I see Benjamin Cohen's got his social risk indicator, which shows how many people are coming to YouTube and looking up Bitcoin and subscribers being added to Bitcoin podcasts. So yeah, I applaud you too for getting your podcast going. I think you're doing some great stuff. I think I saw on Twitter your goal is to interview 300 Bitcoiners this year. So I'm glad I can be a part of that. That's super cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. Like March and February, I had every day. Like March, I will get every day to a podcast, and February I had already every day a podcast. sometimes even 2. So I'm on a good way to do that. The only bottleneck is now publishing the podcast and getting it out. I'm only doing 5 per week, like only. And yeah, it's crazy. The interest is really, really high since January. Like I started this year with like 200, and now I think I had 99, 999 before the podcast. Probably have like now I actually reached the $1,000 mark while we
Nice.
record. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see also your podcast getting back up, because I saw one episode, the last one, it's innovatable Bitcoin, I think the 5th it was, and I saw it like 6 months back. So it's nice to have you back in the Bitcoin podcast game. I enjoyed the conversation with the 3 of you. Really, really cool. Perfect. Then thank you for being on. Thank you for taking the time, Mateo. And I'm hoping to see your podcast again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.